I am an amateur mycologist that I've been growing some mushrooms at home for a little while, and I'm going to cover some of the techniques of propagating mycelium and using that primarily. Well, how I use it is primarily to grow mushrooms with that mycelium that I propagate. So yeah, there are other things you can do with mycelium depending on what species it is, but these are techniques that apply to a wide range of cultivated species. And these are definitely like the kind of core techniques that are widely used by mycologists at home, who are trying to grow gourmet mushrooms or medicinal mushrooms of various types. So so I'm at home right now. This is my little makeshift lab. It is my dining room table. Feel free to jump in on the chat with some questions. I'm gonna copy and paste some of the material lists and recipes that I use. But I'm gonna try to keep this pretty high level and give room for people to ask questions and also get in contact with me later in case you're interested in going deeper into this kind of stuff. But yeah, again, this is for taking, there are many ways you can start cultivating mycelium, which can eventually be used to cultivate the mushroom fruiting bodies of that mycelium. And I'm going to be demonstrating a few ways to do that. And one of those is going to be, John mentioned just a few minutes ago, one of those is going to be by cloning a fruiting body, like a fresh mushroom. And you can do that from a wild forage fruiting body, a lion's mane, an oyster mushroom, a shiitake, a cordyceps, and many more. And you can also do this process with store-bought mushrooms. So they don't just have to be, or farmers market, whatever. They don't just have to be ones that you forage. Sometimes it's even better to use a store-bought mushroom, for example, an oyster mushroom or a lion's mane, because there's a chance that they've been grown indoors and that they're even cleaner and less contamination. So that is a segue into talking about one of the main principles of cultivating at home is you are trying to isolate and preserve the genetics of the mushroom you're hoping to propagate. So to do that, we need a contamination-free environment. We don't want any other potential fungi or bacteria that we don't want. So any volunteer fungi or bacteria, we are trying to eliminate those from our workspace. And this is all you need. I'm using about a 2 foot by 3 or 4 foot little table here, and I'll go over some of the other tools and supplies I'm using here. For starters, I am specifically talking about how I'm going to cultivate mycelium using Agar or Agar. So what I have here in my hand is basically a DIY petri dish. So this is so this is just, you've all probably seen a petri dish in your high school chemistry lab or maybe in other lab settings. But there are several reasons why I make my own at home and don't buy commercial or industrial grade petri dishes. I can go over some of those reasons very, very high level, but for starters, they are not often reusable when you want to use commercial or industrial grade ones. So I like to just reduce waste and reuse as much of my supplies and equipment as possible. So I'm just making my own little petri dishes, and just to sort of cut to the chase, this is just basically a surface in here, and I'll talk about exactly what the substance is inside here. But you can see that there's a pink layer on the bottom of this petri dish, and that is just basically a surface, sort of a blank slate. Think of it like a blank canvas for genetics of mushroom that you want to propagate. And when I say genetics, I'm really talking about mycelium or spores. So this is a surface that will allow, that has a small nutrient content in it. It's a hydrated and somewhat nutrient rich substance that is just a surface for which mycelium can grow across and eventually be expanded or bred or cloned, crossbred, but I won't get into all that. Or a surface for which spores of many different types of mushrooms can be germinated on. So this basically is a surface you can drop some spores from a wild mushroom, from a spore print that you bought online, from a spore print from a syringe, which you can buy online, or spores dropped from grocery store mushrooms that you harvest yourself. Drop a few spores on a dish like this, and your spores will eventually germinate and grow across this surface. So I can actually just show real quick actually just a few disclaimers. I'm doing this all for demonstration purposes only. There's a few shortcuts I'm taking here in this demonstration, which will result in not a completely sterile or sanitized environment for cultivation, but for demonstration purposes, it's okay because I will just basically be pretending like I'm doing everything up to standards of like a mushroom cultivation lab setting. One of those shortcuts that I'm taking, for example, is I'm not going to run my flow hood. So the flow hood is this big box right here that's in front of me, and this is sort of like the biggest and really most expensive and sort of most sophisticated piece of equipment that you would ever need in a at-home agar mycelium cultivation setting. And this is a step up for me. So I've been, and so what it is just a very strong filter. It's a HEPA filter, so it's a HEPA filter attached to a fan. So it's just a fan that plugs in to a regular outlet and blows air through the filter, through this fancy filter here. And this is just kind of a fancier and higher power. Or really, what I mean by that is it allows for smaller particulates than a standard like HVAC filter. And so all it's doing is this fan blows air through a filter and creates a flow of air in this workspace in front of me here, and pushes any contaminants such as dust or even like my breath, which could have like contaminants in it. I know it's kind of gross, but it sort of pushes the air at a constant, slow and steady rate through this space in front of me, and eliminates particulates in the air. I don't know like all of the kind of mechanical processes of how exactly that works, but it is basically a magic filter that allows me to have a clean workstation. So when I run this thing, and I'm not going to do it because it's a little loud and it might make it a little bit hard to hear. But when I run this thing, it is creating a sanitized workspace here. So, okay, so I'm gonna demonstrate a few. Oh yeah, so the alternative, and I'm sorry, I'm just giving context to what materials I'm using to create a clean, workable space for opening these and opening these up to the open air, where I can then introduce mycelium onto one of these plates, or spores. And John, I see your question. I will talk more about when you use spores versus mycelium versus active mycelium that you already have to grow mycelium. And so,
Aaron, we'll accumulate questions until the end.
okay.
I was just noting as you were watching it, but I was just curious. You told me that you had just gotten a flow hood, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the simpler method you had at the mushroom fair.
Exactly. Yeah. So I did. So at the mushroom fair, I was using a simpler and way less expensive product to achieve almost exactly the same thing. I've finally upgraded to this after doing this for about 6 years, using the simplest, cheapest alternative, and it just increases my chances of a contamination-free culture when I'm making transfers, and just increases my chances by a little bit. So I thought it was tough, and it allows for more workspace. The alternative, what I was using at the fair, is this box right here. This is just a plastic tote, and it is called, in the amateur mycology community, a still air box. So what I would do, instead of running that, is I would, and I've really been doing this for years with just this. This is just a plastic tote with handholds. I'll put this down. This is exactly how I would be using it. Is I would stick this table in front of me, and all of a sudden I have a box here, and I can stick my hands in, and now I have a workstation that is mostly free of moving air. So it's just keeping the air still, and preventing potential dust and contamination from falling from the air and into my sterile work environment. I say sterile in quotes because it's not completely sterile. I'm still just in my group house dining room here. But we take measures to create as clean of an environment as possible. So this, although it seems silly, I've seen people really laugh at this, thinking, how could that possibly help compared to just doing an open air, open air transferring, and it really does reduce contamination in your workspace drastically, just by having this small space with sort of a prevention of moving air around. So I would when I'm working here, I would be spraying my hands with isopropyl alcohol, and I'll do this in the demonstration, but also wiping down all the surfaces thoroughly. Isopropyl alcohol is your friend when you're doing this, very cheap and accessible to buy, and just working inside here. So I'm not going to use this for the demonstration because it's way easier to see without it. And again, this is just a demo. But so what I have here is a plate, a Petri plate. The same thing as this. This is just a slightly different construction, and I will talk about the construction of these, or the design of these little DIY Petri plates that I made. But these are just kind of two versions of the same thing. And the only difference between these two, or these two, and I'm going to copy and paste the materials here in a second, is that this one right here, as you can see, is white. It is myceliated. It is covered in mycelium that I introduced to this plate, and it once looked like this. And then you can see I actually labeled it with, this is white oyster LC. So I used a liquid culture syringe, and that is something I have right here. I will go into what that is. But this is basically just a syringe that is full of oyster mushroom mycelium that is suspended in a liquid solution, and the liquid solution here is just half distilled water, half coconut water. And there's many recipes for liquid culture, and there's going to be many recipes for these agar dishes also, but this is a simple one. And there are many resources to learn how to prepare your own liquid cultures, but these are something you can buy all over the internet, you know, from various trusted vendors for many different mushroom species. But so this plate right here has a bunch of oyster mushroom mycelium on it. I was testing this syringe, so I actually created this liquid culture myself. Actually, let me just demonstrate real quick what it looks like in here. It is just on the inside, basically just a fluffy white mess of mushroom mycelium. This grew from really one drop of this liquid culture. So from this liquid culture that I prepared, I dropped one drop of it on this agar plate in my flow hood, so in sterile conditions with this laminar flow of air, and the mycelium propagated. So the cool thing, so when I talk about expanding mycelium, I really mean that there's one drop of this used per plate, and I can take this. I mean, how many drops are in here? Hundreds. So I can turn this one syringe into, you know, 100. We'll just say 100 to be conservative. Culture dishes of mycelium, and with each one of these, I can drop. I can literally just cut this up again, always in front of my flow hood or in my still air box. I can basically take this scalpel or an X-Acto blade. And I'm not going to demonstrate this on this video because that's just for on this workshop. That's just for a different session. But with every single one of these plates, I can just cut it up into like sort of a checkerboard type of thing, or into chunks. With it, you know, open, I would start cutting it up, dump it into some grain. So I use corn and create grain spawn. So I'll just show. I'm kind of going to just assume that people have heard a little bit about grain spawn, or using mushroom spawn to grow mushrooms in a substrate. But grain spawn is this right here is just myceliated grains, and I say grains, I really just mean whole grains. So any whole grains. I use popcorn. This is just standard popcorn from any grocery store. I now buy these in larger bags over the internet, but you can use regular popcorn, dried. You can use rye berries. You can use oats. You can use wild bird seed. There's a lot of different grains that you can procure and use them for introducing mycelium onto them. It is just another medium for which mycelium can grow across. And then this is spawn that I can then combine with a substrate such as hardwood or straw, and use that to fruit my mushrooms. So this is sort of the intermediate step between you know, having a healthy live culture of mycelium and introducing that myceliated material into a growing substrate such as straw, like a bale of straw, or hardwood, or logs, for example, like wood logs. And your substrate is going to depend on which species of mushroom you're using, and even, you know, various factors, whether it's indoors, outdoors that you're trying to cultivate. But all of that for any, you know, really any sort of cultivation most mushroom species that you can find at a farmer's market, you could find in the wild that that can be cultivated. Again, I always just go back to lion's mane, oyster, shiitake and stuff. Like there are some exceptions, but most of those you start with live mycelium that you just you've either grown from an existing sample of mycelium or from spores, and then taking that, mixing it into grains. Again, I'm just showing what this is really just popcorn, and I've hydrated this popcorn, and that's sort of a lesson for another night. But and I've used one myceliated petri dish, cut it up with my scalpel, mixed it into some popcorn, and this is the result. So this is really the result of the mycelium from just one plate. So again, one drop of liquid culture can create 10, 50, 100, 200, one syringe can create, a lot of these individual plates, and then one plate each can create about this much grain spawn. So it's just sort of put in perspective how exponentially you can really expand mycelium if you just continue to feed it a medium that and a nutrient content that it wants to feed on, such as grains.
Aaron, about how long does it take to once you transfer from the agar to your grain for it to grow out to the way you've got it there in the bag?
Yeah, good question. It depends on the species, but generally between 2 weeks and 6 weeks, depending on, and it depends on a lot of factors, such as which species you're using. Different mushroom species, I like to say myceliate instead of colonized. I don't really like that word. And they will myceliate at different rates depending on the species. And so, for example, oyster mushroom is a famously very aggressive species, and it grows super fast and strong and aggressive. You can tell how like really deep white this is, pure fluffy white mycelium growth, whereas some other strains or some other species such as lion's mane will be a little bit slower. They might need a little bit cooler temperatures. There's other experts on this collar and in this organization that know way more about those sort of specific details. But basically anywhere from a few weeks to 6 weeks, sometimes more. And the other factor that really depends on is how much mycelium you are introducing, at first. So I say I introduce about one of these dishes for about a 5-pound bag of grain. But you can, in theory, just use one little square centimeter of this. So I could, in theory, instead of using the entire plate, just dig one little square, or one little piece of it, drop it in, and that's really all you need. Again, in theory, all you need is one piece of live mycelium, and it will just expand. It will just grow across whatever medium you give it to. It just continues to reproduce inside of your medium, such as grain. But if I introduce more, if I introduce a whole plate, or for example, if I put 2 plates in here, or into some fresh grain spawn, it would go maybe twice as fast, or it could go way faster. So
is it a research question for you as to what mushroom you're using and what the appropriate grain substrate is?
So there are I think the common consensus, and another disclaimer is that everything I've learned, but really the vast majority of stuff I've learned has been through the internet and just YouTube and Reddit and different mushroom forums, because I didn't really have anyone sort of teaching this in person. But the general consensus is that almost every commonly used grain, so the ones that I mentioned, oats, corn, rye, birdseed, like they basically are interchangeable, and most research And a lot of this research is really just citizen scientists, just people at home, telling the world what they've done successfully. But most of the research kind of points to it all works the same. There's going to be other factors that will influence your success, such like that's more so than exactly what type of grain you're using. So, for example, how contamination free your work setting was. Like, that's the biggest factor, is you need a clean, contaminant free workspace. That's going to give you a much higher success rate than just using a different grain, and giving it the right growing conditions. So you wouldn't want to introduce mycelium into some grain to grow grain spawn and then put it in the fridge, or put it outside in the super hot, in the middle of the summer. You want to keep it temperature stabilized. Generally, room temperature works for most cultivated species. That becomes a little nuanced when you talk about cordyceps or when you talk about lion's mane. But in general, it's sort of this, there's a temperature range between like the mid 60s and 80 or so. That is kind of the sweet spot for most mycelium cultivation. And that's why this is kind of easy to do, or easy-ish with the right knowledge and materials to do at home, because you can sort of you could usually just stick these on a shelf out of direct sunlight, and it will probably grow. So
You had mentioned to me that your success rate with just the simple still air box was like 90% of avoiding contamination.
Yeah.
That vary a lot based on what grains you use, or
No.
are the grains sterilized in advance?
No, yes, so they are sterilized in advance. I have not found a difference in success rate with the grains I've used. I've really only mainly used rye berries, and then I switched to corn pretty recently, and that is mostly just a factor of price and like the changing price of these commodities. And so I've tended to just buy like the cheapest and most available thing, which is now for me popcorn. And yeah, again, I'm not going to focus too much on grain, because that's just kind of that is, I know what a lot of people who are interested in cultivation are interested in, is how to make grain spawn, which is eventually mixed into a substrate and used to fruit those mushrooms. But I'm here mostly concerned with how to even get this spawn to where it is, and that is really popcorn is gluten free. Yeah. True. Yeah. So just like, it's going to be other factors that determine what grain you use, and not necessarily the success. Like, there's not a commonly agreed upon better grain than others, just in terms like when you're just thinking about how fast it myceliates or how successful it is. Like I said, I determine which one I use based on how expensive it is. So yeah, to get to this stage, we need to have healthy mycelium. So I already talked a little bit about spores and like why you would use spores. Or sorry, not why. I did talk about using spores, and that is one method for cultivating mycelium, which can be used to make grain spawn, and that is by germinating spores. Why would you use? So okay, I'll talk about why you use spores versus using the main alternative to using spores would be using an active sample of mycelium that you already have. So really the main answer to why use spores over mycelium that you already have is, I would say in general, if you have mycelium of the mushroom you're already trying to grow, then you'll do better, and it'll be faster process from agar plate to fruiting of your mushrooms, if you use an active piece of mycelium, because you're eliminating the step of having to germinate the spores first, which is to, of course, get that mycelium to even be alive and active. Because there's that, and then, yeah, versus already having the mycelium and then expanding that. So when I say expanding the mycelium, again, I talked about how you can use one of these myceliated plates to grow, to turn it into grain spawn. And this is sort of like, this is really the ratio you get. But if I only have one of these, let's say a friend gave me this. So a lot of people get their mycelium. You can buy these online. Like you can go to certain, well-known mycology supply vendors and say, I want to buy a lion's mane culture. And you'll often see that culture sold as a petri dish, like a sealed petri dish that was prepared in a lab setting. And so a lot of people at home might just buy a dish that already has mycelium on it. So if I just have one plate with mycelium, I'm not going to put this all into a bag of grain and make grain spawn out of it, because I'd be putting all my eggs in one basket in doing that. That might lead to, so I mean, John said what I told him a few weeks ago, which was I generally have a 90% success rate, but that's not good enough. Even and sometimes that can be 80% success rate, and even that's considered good for like an at-home mycologist, but that's not good enough success rate for me to justify putting all my eggs in one basket and possibly wasting this entire plate, which is my only live sample, if there's a 20% chance or a 10% chance that it's going to completely contaminate and and then I'll have to start from scratch and possibly buy a new culture. I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is take this and make copies of it. Basically, create redundancy, create a sort of a library of backups of this culture. So to do that, I've prepared. So again, I have one of these. I do have many of these, but you'll see why I have so many of them. But let's just say I only have one in my possession. A friend gave it to me. They had to move. They had to get rid of their, mycology setup. So they gave it to me to get started. I want to create backups. So I've prepared these blank petri plates. I have 6 of them here. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 of these dishes here. What I'm going to do, and normally what I do in this scenario is I would sort of take this and take a little sample of each, take a little sample of mycelium, like really just a little sample, using my scalpel or X-Acto blade or some other tools, and stick a piece onto each of these plates here and wait 1 to 3 weeks or so. And hopefully each one of these will turn into a fully myceliated plate like this, making 6 copies just from one. So I'll just demonstrate. So I'm going to demonstrate that process of just taking a piece of mycelium and making copies of it to expand that mycelium. But to answer the question about why use spores versus using live mycelium is really like use spores if that's all you can get, or if you found, if you have a spore print, or if you found the mushroom in the wild and you know how to make a spore print, then you can do that and then harvest the spores and then try to germinate those on Agar. But if you already have mycelium, then this is just another way to do that. You're not always going to get spores in a meaningful quantity, or you're not always going to get a fresh sample of spores from every mushroom you want. Sometimes it's easy to just buy a culture or to get your hands on a culture and just expand it like that, and then eliminate the step of having to germinate spores. The other
Is another alternative for mycelium just to cut some context out of a mushroom you've collected?
Yep. So that was what I was just getting to. So the kind of the coolest way, in my opinion, to start a culture of a mushroom you want to cultivate is to just take a mushroom fruiting body that you have gotten your hands on, either from the wild or from the grocery store or wherever. And the mycelium is in this mushroom, right? So this is the fruiting body, but it is a, I think we all know that a fruiting body is just the exterior conglomeration of mycelium of the organism that is mostly in the ground or is mostly contained in the substrate that the mushroom's growing on. But a mushroom is just a big hunk of mycelium, especially like the stem area. So what I would do if I had a mushroom that I really wanted to clone is I can just, and I'm going to demonstrate this too, is I can just open this up, and I'll talk about why I'm going to open it up, but I basically just break it open, do the same thing, take my scalpel, cut a little piece, just cut a little piece of the fruiting body itself and stick it on one of these plates. Same thing, it's just mycelium that you're transferring from the fruiting body into a theoretically sterile blank canvas for mycelium to grow on, again, which then can be used to create grain spawn from that. So those are some of the primary ways of getting mycelium to grow. I'm gonna demonstrate just kind of what that looks like. Again, I'm not going to work with a sterile environment. I'm not going to run this thing because of the noise. But I will show you what I normally do when I'm getting ready for this process. So I'm going to start with actually, I'll start with the cloning, because that's kind of just like the coolest way, in my opinion, of a fruiting body. So what I first do is, this is isopropyl alcohol in a spray bottle. I just get this 70%, any 70%, or 91% is usually the other option. Isopropyl alcohol, and I've just filled some of that into the spray bottle. It just makes it easier to spray across my surfaces and create like a clean environment, potentially killing anything that could get into my petri dish when I open it up. I don't want that. So I'm going to flip on my flow hood here, or enter my still air box, but I'm gonna actually move these out of the way. I'm just gonna show sort of what this process generally looks like. I'm also gonna flame sterilize the tip of my scalpel here, which is just another measure to reduce any potential contaminant that might be dragged in from this tool. So, well, actually, first, usually what I do is wipe it down with alcohol. Then I'm going to just flame sterilize it with a regular lighter. I'll show you my kind of fancier, more mad sciencey contraption in a second, but I flame sterilize it until it's red, until the tip is red, basically. But people will say different things about what you need to do, but basically just killing off anything. I'm gonna, again, this airflow is now coming. I can now safely open this up. If my flow hood was not on, I wouldn't open this to the air, because immediately that would allow for dust particulate in the air to just get on the surface and potentially compete with the mycelium that I'm trying to propagate. So I'm gonna open this up. I'm gonna like really try my best to just like not let it touch a lot of other stuff. And I'm really gonna try to do this fast. And again, this is just a demonstration. In general, I'm kind of trying to do this as quickly, but as carefully as possible, so that I don't allow, just to reduce your possibility of getting contaminants from the air into your culture. So this is a shiitake mushroom I got at a grocery store. Nothing special, but I'm gonna open it up and really just like rip open the middle of the fruit body. I chose the fattest, chunkiest mushroom I got for a few reasons. One is because when you're cloning a mushroom, again, I'm doing a cloning of the shiitake right now, and I want to clone like the best looking mushroom I've found, like, because in theory that has the best genetic physiological characteristics. And my hope is that by selecting the best, the biggest, juiciest mushroom, that my future mushrooms that I could grow from this culture will have similar physiological traits to this one. You can select for this is like the clone process. You could select for different, if you found a particularly cold resistant strain, like you can clone that over time. If you found I don't know if you wanted to grow super small mushrooms for some reason, like you can just continuously selectively breed the small fruiting bodies. But in general, you're basically just going to grow kind of shiitakes, normal looking shiitakes. The other reason I want the fattest, like the biggest in particular, is because it gives me more material to work with. What I'm going to do next is really just split it open with my fingers. And I'm opening it up to take a sample, because everything inside of here that you just are now seeing for the first time, this white part, has never been exposed to the air before. It's all been growing, in a substrate, and it has never seen the light of day until this very second, which means that it is sterile, basically, in theory, because it is just pure mycelium. So I wouldn't really want to take a sample of the outside of the mushroom, because this has been touched, this has been exposed to the air, there could be dirt on it that is carrying contaminants. So I'm really opening it up from the middle. I already flame sterilized my scalpel, and I'm just going to try to, again, I'd be doing this in front of my flow hood, but I want to show, and this is always a little bit of a kind of just a tricky process, but I'm basically just cutting out a chunk. Like it doesn't really matter what you get. It's just got to be sort of a piece of it. And I now have it on the tip of my scalpel. You can see that. Drop it in. I've already kept this open for far too long, so it's probably going to be contaminated, but this is just a demonstration. And I'm just going to scrape it so it, sometimes you can use the edge of the plate and just scrape it so it drops right on, and then immediately I'm closing that lid to prevent anything else from getting there. I can put that down for a second, and this whole surface has been wiped down, so it's very clean. And so now all I have is a dish with, a little piece of shiitake, a little piece of shiitake fruiting body on here, and it's really just a piece of mycelium that is part of the fruiting body that will now start to just grow across the surface. And over time, you're just going to see the white mycelial hairs just expand from the center where I dropped this sample all the way out across the surface. This is a good time to just quickly drop the supplies that I use here into the chat, and everyone can just look at that. And I'll also send something out maybe after, which has like more instruction. But so again, this is just a nutrient solution that is acting as a surface for which mycelium to grow on. The ingredient, I'll just talk about the ingredients real quick. The main ingredient that we use is agar or agar, that people say different things. That comes in this powder form when you buy it. This is what I buy, is this Telephone brand agar powder, and it is just a white powder that is actually a derivative of seaweed. and it is really just a neutral. It's actually like a neutral substance that is used as sort of a gelatin. It is used to create a gelatinous substance when introduced with water. So really, agar is something that's used as like a vegan alternative to gelatin. So it will be used in like desserts or different food products as a kind of squishy, gelatinous substance that is basically just creating a little jello. So really, all you're looking at here is just a little bit of jello, you know, in a cup. And so you see the ingredients here. It's 2.5 grams of agar mixed with 2 teaspoons of potato flakes. So that's going to be our nutrient, our main nutrient that the mycelium will kind of feed on. It's just a starch. I use potato flakes. There's a lot of other recipes for this, but I'm just telling people what I use, and it's a simple one, and it's been successful for me. Just potato starch. Mixed with 1/2 cup of water, 1 drop of honey. It's just a sugar that is an additional nutrient for the mycelium to grow. And then I use a drop of food coloring. The reason I use a drop of food coloring and I just put that all on the stovetop, in a saucepan on the stovetop, heat it up. It doesn't have to be like boiling or anything. I just kind of heat it up until all those materials are dissolved and uniform, and then pour them one by one into these dishes before they go into an instant pot where they're sterilized. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's the recipe for creating this surface, and the food coloring. So the food coloring is used for really just for coloration purposes. So most mycelium that you are trying to grow in general, for cultivating gourmet or medicinal mushrooms, is going to be white. You want it to be white in color, and if it's looking like there's other colors in here, then there's a good chance it's contaminated. So if you see green, if you see some yellows, black definitely, red, like a deep red, like you have a contamination almost definitely. So the pink, or I used to use green, it just makes it so that there's a little more color contrast when you're looking at the white mycelium growing. You're looking out for white mycelium growth, and it just helps create a bit of a color contrast so that you could see it better. Without the food coloring, it would just be this kind of murky, kind of murky whitish yellow color. And sometimes that could be hard to see contaminants on your surface. So this is just like a color contrast thing. Again, when I have this, if I have a really good fruiting body, I would probably take, in normal circumstances, I would dedicate 3 or 4 of these plates to just this one mushroom. I want to take a few more samples just to increase my chances. So I'll do the exact same thing, just cut a piece, drop it on new plates, and just increase my chances of hopefully having a healthy culture that will soon hopefully look like this, and I can make grain spawn out of it for cultivation. Okay, so I'm gonna put that fruiting body aside for now. And I'll just show real quick like what it looks like to do a transfer. So say that I then grow one of those out successfully, right? So let's pretend this is now my shiitake that after 3 or 4 weeks, my plate has myceliated with that little fruiting body sample, and it looks something like this. Well, let's say I only got one healthy one. And the others got contaminated. Well, I wanna make sure I preserve that instead of dumping it into grain. So I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna transfer it out. Well, not the same thing. This is gonna be your expansion of healthy mycelium once you have it from a fruiting body or from spores or from liquid culture that you were able to propagate. I'm gonna go and make a few copies of this. So just open up a new one, take my healthy plate, cut a little piece. And in general, you're looking for, again, the best kind of like the best, fluffiest little section of mycelium. Got a little wedge of it. That's all it really takes. Is I use sort of like a square centimeter size. Obviously, this is like a wedge or triangle, but and I'm probably gonna try to close that up just to protect it, and then just drop it right on the surface of my blank, fresh plate, and cover it up. And let's wait. Then it's just waiting. I might do that a few more times. Like I'm not going to do it now for the sake of time, but I would do that usually a few more times just to increase my odds and to just have a bigger supply of healthy genetic material that I can use to make spawn and to cultivate it. So that's all it really is. It's just kind of transferring a series of transfers of mycelium to expand your supply. Yeah, I'm gonna talk. I'll try to.
Aaron, obviously, I've shortened what should have been a much longer presentation by you to we're running overtime, but I did kind of want to get to the end result here of what you do with the mycelium once you've grown it out like this, and then you put it into in your case, popcorn, which I assume is sterilized popcorn in a bag to grow out. Are those bags something that is special that you purchase online?
Yeah, so well, I'll actually show a few different examples here. For most of my time doing mushroom cultivation, I've been using jars. This is just a quart-sized jar. And so these are basically the same exact thing here, just in different containers. So I've upgraded to bags because you can put more in it. So this is just so you can make more at once. But it's the same exact thing. I like these obviously because they are reusable. So these are not single use, whereas sometimes these bags can be single use. So I try to sort of reduce my use of these. But yeah, these are special mushroom bags. There are some like name brands that are really widely used, but it's just a plastic bag that is rated for autoclave use. Autoclave just means a unit, something to sterilize your grain. So before you introduce mycelium into grain, such as corn, you actually need to first hydrate it. So this needs to be soaked in water. So I actually basically take corn, I soak it in water, I boil the corn, the just dried corn kernels in water for about an hour so that they saturate with water and they basically get filled with water on the inside. You then strain them from a boiling pot of water, dry them, let them dry in the air. And when I say dry, you're really just letting the surface of the corn kernels dry, but the inside of the corn kernels will be fully saturated with water. That's why we cooked it ahead of time. And that will be a desirable substrate or a desirable medium for the mycelium to grow on. But before I can use that hydrated, water saturated grain, I have to sterilize it first. Even though it's been boiled, you still have to put it in a pressure cooker. So I actually use an Instant Pot primarily. That is going to be the single biggest expense or the biggest item you'll need to really get started if you want to do this is have an Instant Pot. And that's just a device that will get your hydrated grains to a temperature that's hot enough and under pressure for long enough to completely kill any bacteria or fungus that could be growing on that grain. So you wouldn't want to introduce mycelium from one of these petri dishes onto grain that has not been sterilized because it could still contain contaminants. I will follow up with my process for preparing grain in more depth, but it's basically just that. It's hydrating some dried grains, so oats or corn or rye berries, hydrating them with water, and then sterilizing them using a Instant Pot or a pressure cooker. I will follow up with more materials about that, but yeah, so this jar is the same thing. It's also been, this is autoclavable. This you can put in the pressure cooker before it has mycelium on it. Before you introduce mycelium to it, you have to sterilize it. So I could fit 3 or 4 of these in my Instant Pot, sterilize them for 45 minutes or so at 12 psi. That's just kind of a detail that you'll worry about when you're actually at that stage. And then you can introduce your mycelium to it, because everything in here will have been killed. Anything that could potentially compete with, this is a king oyster mushroom spawn. And yeah, before filling it up with mycelium, we had to kill any bacteria that was on it. And so the construction of this is just the quart jar that you can buy at like pretty much any department store or I guess like Target or whatever. And then there's one hole that I drilled on top. I used a 1/4-inch drill bit, drilled holes on the tops of these, and then stuffed this synthetic fiber in it. And it's really just pillow stuffing. So you can get that from a lot of different places, but it's just pillow stuffing that I've used to create a little DIY air filter. So all it's doing is allowing the organism, the mycelium of the mushroom in here to breathe, and to allow for an exchange of air that is required for a living organism to survive and to grow. But it does not allow particulates to go in and out. It's got, all the hairs of this basically just serve as a filter that allows air, but no particulate. It's actually
we all still have a ton of N95 masks around in our house. If we cut a little square of that out, put it on the top of it, does that do what
I
you're
don't know.
looking for?
Maybe. I mean, I'd say that's something that's worth testing out. I'll just say again that really a lot, and I would even maybe say the majority of this work and these experiments have been done by just normal people at home and not paid or institutional scientists. It's just been by people trying things out and telling everyone that it works, and everyone agreeing that it works and doing it themselves. So it's always something for someone to test out. But since I wanted to kind of just get results faster instead of trying a bunch of different things, I did just use a design that was already sort of taught to me by people on the internet that have tried it and tested it out. So I didn't want to go through the various testing of different filter options. I just use so on here, and it's actually, I have a similar thing going on my plates. On my Petri plates, I have, on this one, I actually have, oh, well, let me show this one. This one I have 2 holes that I drilled. So one hole is a filter, and it's a similar thing that I did with the jar where I used a pillow stuffing, but this is just micropore tape. So this is a 3M product. It's just tape that has that is filter fabric basically, and allows for airflow without the exchange of particulates. And then the other hole on here I covered with silicone sealant stuff from Ace Hardware, and that hole that is covered in silicone sealant is used as an injection port for syringes. So if I wanted to germinate spores on agar, for example, if I bought a spore syringe such as this one, this is just water. This is just distilled water with a bunch of spores. You can't even see the spores. I can hardly even see them, but they're basically just microscopic black dots inside this syringe, which is otherwise just distilled water. And what I would do is put a needle on it, sterilize it in a flame, and then stick my needle through my DIY injection port, which is just, again, silicone sealant, and drop 1 drop of spores. So this solution has thousands and thousands and thousands, if not more, spores. All you need is 1 spore to germinate. But if you drop 1 drop of this stuff onto a fresh, clean agar plate, there's a good chance that one of your many thousands of spores in here will germinate. So that is why we put an injection port in addition to an air filter on your petri dishes.
Great.
Yeah. I can talk like way more, obviously.
I know you could go on for hours, maybe days.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should probably wrap things up for tonight because we're starting to lose people, but this has been really awesome. And I know that we will hit you up to do some in-person workshops going forward as well, because the ones you did in the past were very well received. So this is great to get this all on video for anyone to watch and not have to go to the in-person stuff. And then I know people love to get their hands on things and actually play with the stuff in person too. So
yeah, just to get the sense that it's doable with this kind of equipment, I think is really helpful for people.
Yeah. Everything here except for the flow hood and the Instant Pot. I mean, the Instant Pot you can get these days for $40-50, I think. Sometimes even cheaper than that. And everything else is cheap, materials from your everyday stores like Target or Walmart or whatever you use. Like, for example, my Petri plates are I just got like an 8-pack or 6. This is a 6-pack of these, little plastic Tupperware dishes from Target, I believe. And so you could spend really, you could get everything for under, $75, or, if you wanted to. It just, of course, things start to add up and you start to get a little more deeper into it, but you could start very small. I'm happy to share resources and my designs for different things, which I've mostly gotten from other people. But yeah, it's like pretty easy to get started with not much at all. And there's sort of a growing community of people that are willing to share their genetics, share their live mycelium cultures with each other, including me and some of the members of this club that I have kind of a network with now. And you can really go big. I mean, with this, like, you could be running a small mushroom farm, with these materials.
Do you do when you grow your mushrooms in these bags? Do you do that indoors mostly, or?
Yeah. So with this is oyster mushroom. Actually, April Thompson gave me the original. She had a grow kit of white oyster mushroom, and when I was starting to get into this, I took one of her. Well, she gave me one of her white oyster mushroom fruiting bodies that was growing on her grow kit, and I cloned it and have since been using it for over a year now, just expanding it infinitely, basically, all from one clone sample of an oyster mushroom. This I would usually, so oyster grows really well on straw or on hardwood. A lot of people use like hardwood pellets, which come in like a big bag, and you basically create like grow bags using with the case of oyster mushrooms, you can combine this grain spawn, which basically breaks up pretty easily once you move around, and you can combine this with a substrate such as straw or hardwood in about like a 1 to 10 ratio. So I need 1 part of this stuff, 10 parts substrate, and depends on between those two, and I'll just address those two real quick. You can do them either indoors or outdoors. It just depends on kind of what you're working with, what season it is, what location you're in. So in the summer, I can make like straw buckets. I can take 5-gallon buckets, drill holes in them, and stick a bunch of pasteurized straw into the bucket, and then mix in 10% by weight spawn into that straw. So 10% straw, 90% or 90%, 10% spawn, 90% straw by weight into that bucket, and it will myceliate, and you can grow those oyster mushrooms right out of that bucket. I'm not going to do that in the winter. There wouldn't really be, if I really wanted mushrooms to grow in the course of a few weeks, I would not stick a bucket full of myceliated straw out in the winter, because it will not grow in cold temperatures. So indoors, I could basically do the same thing, but bring them indoors and create like a fruiting chamber if I wanted to, or just be very diligent about spraying with water. Like a lot of people get like a grow kit, and it's the same thing. Those are just like usually a grow kit that you buy from like a company such as North Spore, or there's other vendors that I'm not remembering the name of right now, but you can those are probably just like hardwood shavings or hardwood sawdust, mixed with probably some other nutrient that they might use like commercially or on an industrial level, and then mixed with grain spawn like this. Again, in like a 1-to-10 or sometimes 1-to-5 ratio, depending on what species of mushroom you're working with. And so it just depends on what fruiting conditions you're working with, and what you have access to. Like,
so the bag you're holding is like 1 step away from a grow kit, which is
exactly.
You take that and put it in a 10-to-1 ratio and something else.
I can maybe make 10 grow kits with this, like, because this is kind of a lot. Like, I don't need all of this to make just one grow kit, or like one, grow kit about this size. Like this can go a long way, because it's really, you just need a little bit of mycelium that is healthy to be introduced into a different substrate that it can grow on, and and expand from there.
So I noticed you were doing multiple agar plates, and we had a question about cleaning up agar plates when you've got contamination, and Michael Weiss suggested something about Coca-Cola agar plates, which is something I've never heard of, as a way of cleaning that up. Because you do multiples, do you just not bother to clean them up? You just
No. So I do. I've never used Coca-Cola. I've never even heard of that, but I do just, if so, sometimes I will try to prepare a bunch of plates, and I get 3 healthy ones and 1 unhealthy one. Well, I might want to throw 3 of those into grain and start growing grain spawn. But if I have a contaminated, or one that's a little bit contaminated, depending on the level of contamination, I can go back into my sterile environment, isolate the healthy section of that. So maybe some of it has a little contamination growth on it, and some of it, and then most of it is healthy, or even if just a little bit of it is healthy and white in color, I can just take a little sample of that healthy bit and isolate it. So just take it out and stick it on a new plate, and hopefully that will remove the healthy section from otherwise contaminated media here, and then be able to use that as my new sort of
Mhm.
sample that I can then expand. I wouldn't, if there was a contamination on one of these, you don't put it into grain, because then your grain will just get contaminated the same way. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, so yeah, that's one of the big reasons you use Agar, is to clean up your samples, and isolate, good stuff from the bad stuff, and hopefully eliminate the bad stuff altogether by doing that process. Sometimes, so a lot of times people, might have to do this process 2 or 3 times before you end up with a clean sample. So it can be, depending on how clean your environment is and how clean your sample is, it might take a few iterations of isolating and cleaning it up for you to get a workable sample.
That's
Okay,
great.
guys, this is all super
you.
interesting and very inspiring, but I'm going to cut you off because it's almost 10 o'clock.
Yeah, totally.
But we've got this all recorded for anyone that has already gone to bed, and we're clearly going to have to just schedule another one sometime, because there's a lot to take in here, and it's all great stuff. And I know there's a lot of folks in the club who are interested in cultivation. So thank you so much, Aaron. This has been great.
Thank you, Aaron.
Michael too. I see he's still on, and yeah, we definitely could have had 2 entirely separate nights for each of you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And yeah, he's right there. And, as I just said, agar powder and water works well. Like there's so many different people testing different things, and really everyone, as long as it works, it works. Like,
Yeah, I think the bottom line is it's doable, and there's information out there on the internet to tell you a variety of ways of approaching it, but it should not be too intimidating, because the process itself is relatively simple, which is to get either spores or context, put it on an agar plate, make the agar, and then expand that out in a sterilized medium, which you can do in your Instapot, which sounds like a great fun thing to do over the winter while waiting for morels.
Exactly. And you can also make soup in your Instant Pot, so it's not just.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, guys.